For the first time in franchise history, the Winnipeg Jets are 3-0. How long will this run of form last? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, the Jets have had a 3-0 start to the season, and I think a lot of Jets fans are feeling pretty good about it. I think you can all enjoy the wins, and I think you can certainly be happy about the record, but there's definitely room for some improvement. I think we've seen a whole gamut of interesting things. We've seen a renewed special teams, we've seen excellent goaltending, and we've seen some questionable 5v5 play. But obviously, I think the biggest storyline that really sticks out over the last couple of weeks, really just the first week or so, is that the Jets have now won 2 straight games, A, without scoring a 5v5 goal, which is pretty crazy, and B, both of their game-tying goals to force overtime came with the goalie pulled, which is not something that I think you're ever likely to see all that often, much less in the modern era where when you pull the goalie, typically it's either at the end of the game or you maybe have just a couple of seconds remaining at the end of a period. The last time a team scored a goal like this, like the one the Jets did with Scheifele against the Wild, was like 2022. I think Murat Atesh from The Athletic looked it up. I think it was maybe Denis Gurianov from the Dallas Stars. So quite frankly, just does not happen that often. I'd like to spend some time talking about this run and, what's really stood out so far in the first couple of games, where the Jets are doing well, where they maybe need some improvement, and some of the really cool moments from pulling your goalie in 2 different scenarios and somehow tying the game in consecutive games. That's just pretty crazy. But before we chat about all of that, did want to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets have somehow gone 2 games against the Blackhawks and the Wild, having pulled their goalie in different situations. And, with the extra skater, they've actually scored the game-tying goal. And it's really critical that they did this because these were the only goals that they would score in regulation, which obviously we'll talk about that being a little bit of a concern later in the episode. But the uniqueness of how the Jets did it, I think, for these first couple of goals, it's pretty fun, right? So the first one came against Chicago. We talked about that game a bit earlier, but in case you forgot, the Chicago game tire came in the last minute of regulation. The Jets were down 1-0, and throughout the game they'd had some issues at 5v5 creating, which I don't think says great things if you're struggling against Chicago. But I guess credit to the Hawks, they are stronger than they were last year. But for a Jets team that does fancy itself a playoff contender, you'd probably like them to boss proceedings a bit more. All that said, Ehlers was the one who ended up receiving the puck pretty quickly off the faceoff inside the zone. And he basically, instead of cycling the puck up high and starting like a perimeter rotation, decided he was just going to go and attack the net. And, on this play, it was actually quite clever because first off, the defense doesn't exactly have as much time to react with how quick Ehlers is to close that gap. And then as soon as Ehlers made the shot attempt, it gets saved, but it gets pinged off as a rebound, and Scheifele, who's extremely smart and knows where to be almost all the time when it comes to this sort of stuff, was extremely opportunistic and poached basically a free goal. And it's this kind of stuff as to why I've always been in favor of them actually playing together. I know that people look at them and often see stylistic differences, but I actually think that because of the way that they both approach the game, they have some unique chemistry that maybe people don't acknowledge. But we'll chat about that a little bit later because it kind of feeds into the 5v5 question. But the second goal was really fun. It was towards the end of, I forget if it was the first or second period against Minnesota, but the Jets had an offensive zone faceoff, and we've seen them do this a couple of times, and teams have occasionally pulled the goalie right before the end of the period if they had an OZ draw. Usually they'll do this if they maybe have like 2.5 to 3 seconds, where realistically it'd be very hard for the opponent to get a shot on goal on the other side of the ice. But if you get the OZ win, you might actually have a chance to get a shot attempt. And so Lowry won the faceoff very cleanly. And because Lowry was the extra man, because he won the faceoff, and he basically got the puck to the point really quickly, Mark Scheifele was back there towards the blue line and was able to just sort of glide across towards the left and just sort of shot. I don't know if it was like a screenshot or what, but I think there was enough traffic to where the goaltender didn't really have a chance to see it. I think Gustafsson just really didn't have a clean read. And, just like that, the Jets were tied 1-1, which was actually a really, really critical goal because, well, like I said, the Jets didn't score, another goal in regulation. And so, forcing overtime basically gave Winnipeg a huge opportunity. Thanks to like a late game power play, they ended up actually converting on this one. That the 4v3 with Kyle Connor basically just ripping one right past Gustafsson was a beautiful play, great goal. And, if only the game was always played with the Jets man advantage or in overtime, like Scheifele and Connor together just cook when they have space and time. So more of that in overtime and special teams, please, because they have some great puck movement when they can not worry so much about having to evenly match an opponent. Otherwise, from this Wild game, I would say it was not the most thrilling game. Minnesota was coming on the second end or the back end of consecutive nights of play. Back-to-backs are already starting, and they also lost their best center in Eriksson Ek. So I thought the Jets would control this game. They did, and if you look at like the Corsi differentials and stuff, Winnipeg definitely dominated the shot attempts, and I'm sure that they won the expected goal battle. But I think the concern here is that when you look at who was sort of winning their battles more, you notice a very familiar trend. The Kupari and the Lowry lines have really been leading the way for the Jets the first couple of games. And I think for me, that's a little bit of a worrying sign. Not because it's something that can't be fixed, but because the Jets don't really want to rely on these guys too much, right? This is a situation where, I love them as lines, and I think in what they're asked to do, they are phenomenal. The Kupari line has already exceeded my expectations for what they would look like this year, and it's not like the Jets have faced anyone crazy yet, but they've done pretty well in some very controlled instances. And I think the Wild game, Minnesota started running out of steam, and at that point, the Jets definitely took over. And all of the lines were creating chaos and chances to varying degrees. But what I continue to see is that, your skill lines are struggling to create. And, in the Wild game, they had more space and time and they started getting more shot attempts and stuff. And in all fairness to them, they did miss on a couple of very good opportunities where there was a great slot pass that maybe Velarde or Scheifele or Connor just barely missed connecting on. The Perfetti and Ehlers combo, I don't recall as much from those guys. I don't remember that line having a lot. There's another issue with that line that we'll chat about in a little bit. But overall, I just feel like this game, it was okay. It wasn't great. It was okay. The Jets deserved to win for sure, but I don't think it was like a dominant victory in the way that I was expecting. Gustafsson was fine, and he did a good job in net for Minnesota, but I feel like you maybe want Winnipeg to kind of put down some of these opponents earlier. With Minnesota, they aren't necessarily the deepest team, but kind of like the Jets, if you leave them in a game long enough, at some point they will hit pay dirt. And sometimes they can squeeze in victories and stuff here where they maybe don't deserve it, but they still get it anyways. And so, you just don't want to leave an opponent like this hanging around in a game and giving them an opportunity to try and either tie it or even get a win. So important for the Jets to take care of business like they did. No complaints there. I think it was, a nice win at the end of it. But, in just a moment, I do want to chat a little bit about the 5v5 play because I think this is a problem that's not really new. I know people are going to say it's only 3 games into the season, yada, yada, yada. But the truth is we have a bigger sample size of some of the stuff that's wrong with, the current, I would say, 5v5 play from this team. And it's something that kind of comes back from last season and even years prior. So we will chat about that in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Hims. Folks, sometimes you get an intimate moment when you least expect it, and you want to be ready, but your schedule's busy. You don't have time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Well, you don't have to anymore. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. They provide you access to a range of doctor-trusted ED medications and treatments like chewable hard mints, Viagra, Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. And best of all, you don't have to go through a really uncomfortable doctor visit. You don't need insurance, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about some interesting takeaways from the first couple of Jets games. Obviously, Winnipeg finished their win against the Minnesota Wild in overtime on Sunday. Great fun. We all love a good home victory. And I think it also still left maybe some lingering questions. The one thing that I really haven't questioned so far is the special teams, though. The power play and the PK, well, they've been doing pretty well. The PK has not really given up much. A couple of chances here and there, but I mean, you would expect that when you're on the man disadvantage in Winnipeg's case. But so far, I mean, they've been aggressive. They've even created some rush counters the other way. And I think the overall aggression and pressure against opposing puck carriers has been much improved. Will it lead to moments where you blow a coverage or miss an opportunity or something? Absolutely. But I would rather that than the Jets basically just sitting and waiting for power plays to dice them apart. That is where you're basically guaranteed to give up something dangerous. Now the Jets are trying to take control of their own destiny, and I think the pressure has actually worked. The guys are rotating in the diamond. They're applying opponent mismatches with some maybe overloads on the puck carrier. They've been trying to, cut down the gaps in spacing, just much better overall on the PK. Will it concede pretty soon? I'm sure, because you can't stop this stuff forever. But I think the Jets have already taken some good steps at trying to limit some of the quality and volume of chances. The power play, I mean, what do you really have to say about it? It's just much better. Not perfect, mind you. The zone entries and stuff are still a bit of a work in progress, but compared to last year's power play, you would not think this is the same team. They have done a masterful job. It is like a phenomenal power play. I think it's already ranked in the top 3 of the NHL right now, if I recall correctly. It's been clicking along. The Jets power play looks like a real power play now. And in fact, if it continues on this rate, which it won't, but it'll still be pretty good, this will be one of the best power plays in the league this season, which is fantastic because I think the Jets have a very big issue right now when it comes to the non-special teams part of the game at 5v5. I don't want to blow this out of proportion, but right now the Jets are not really scoring at 5v5. And I know it's just a few games, but this is a problem that kind of predates the season. The Jets have traditionally not been as strong of a 5v5 team. Oftentimes, Winnipeg has either been a little bit below average or basically break even. And for some teams that have the talent of like an Edmonton or a Colorado or some of these other teams where you have individual players that can basically take over shifts and win you games, they don't have to worry sometimes about that stuff. They naturally will control the play better. Although in Edmonton's case, maybe not at the start of the season, apparently. But for the Jets, you just don't really have that same kind of margin for error. Not that our players aren't as good, but we don't have the same kind of individual scoring talent that some of these like mega teams do. And so the Jets kind of have to have their top line and, all of their skilled top players scoring because like without it, it becomes a bit of an issue. Even if the top line is getting killed in its matchups, bare minimum, you do need them to score. And so far, they've not really been able to do that when it's at 5v5. When it's a power play or a man advantage with the goalie pool, they have certainly done that, so no problem there. But it's when it's normal 5v5 play where the Jets just aren't getting enough. And for one thing, I think you've seen the Jets have had issues getting to the slot. I thought that would be something where they'd be a little bit stronger, but this year, other than the Kupari and Lowry lines, the skill lines haven't really been able to cut the area right in front of the keeper. A couple of times where Scheifele and Ehlers and maybe a couple of other guys, Connor too, have gotten closer to that or even gotten some good shot attempts that maybe they just missed. But overall, I think Winnipeg has probably struggled to penetrate this region in that slot area more than I think they'd like. I think they are definitely aware that they're trying to get there, and they're aware it's a problem. But actually doing it on a game-to-game basis, it is a challenge, and it's why I've kind of talked about making a switch. Connor and Ehlers swapping places doesn't fix everything with the team, but I think you will have some considerable improvement with your first line and, the Nemestikov line, which just, I got to be honest, I think Nemestikov might be starting to slow down, and I think it's really causing problems for both Ehlers and Perfetti. And those guys already don't play well together. Ehlers and Perfetti don't really have that much chemistry because stylistically, they're just very different players and they're looking for different things. And so they're not on the same page. And Nemesnikov is struggling basically just to keep up. I think Vlad will probably turn it around later this season, but if he is starting to play like this and it becomes a long-term thing, you might start having to ask yourself what his role should be. Maybe more in the bottom six, right? So this could be a problem because the Jets don't exactly have a 2C. I've thought about, some suggestions for Perfetti to maybe go back to center, which probably would help things. I don't know how much different it's going to be than having Nemestikov there, but at this point, if Vlad is safer as a wing, I'd probably make the switch just to see if it maybe gets him going too. So, with all that in mind, I just think Ehlers is like the dominant puck carrier for Scheifele and Vilardi to lean on. And I think you've seen that times that 81, 55, and 13, when they're, facing maybe deeper blocks and maybe some teams that are quite frankly just clogging zone space and stuff, they're slower. They're not able to get past some of these defenders, and they kind of defer to each other, and at times it makes them hesitate a little too much. And so they're not able to generate that offensive zone or not able to convert that offensive zone pressure into real scoring chances. Ehlers is kind of a different kind of player where he'll actually create that space, and then he finds Connor, or he'll find Scheifele and Vilardi. Connor, too, if he was to swap for Vilardi instead. But I think I'd prefer 27 and 13 and 55 altogether. Connor, I think you just want to play with Perfetti. I think those guys just naturally fit each other. They both want to slow the game down inside the offensive zone. They're both very smart once they start getting into those, face-off circled spaces and stuff. Who plays between them? Well, that's a bigger question, I guess. You could maybe try Perfetti at center and maybe you flip Vlad out wide and have that be your line. I don't know. Until Nemesnikov is able to really turn it around, or if he doesn't, I just think it does leave some questions about your 2C role. And it's clear that Lambert really wasn't ready for that, but I also don't know who else really is. So, yeah, something to keep an eye on for the next few weeks and months. Obviously, right now, it's not been enough of a problem to cause the Jets to lose. But I think the deeper you go in the season, the more stuff like this will start to stand out. And I get a lot of pushback on Twitter about pointing out that the Jets' 5v5 offense has kind of gone scoreless in 2 straight games against teams that weren't that strong. But I'll be honest, it's kind of a thing going back from previous seasons. And if it happens again this year, it just puts way more pressure on Hellebuck, the defense, and your depth lines to really carry proceedings. And that's just not how true top-end contenders are built. So, again, I don't want to sound the alarm, but it is kind of concerning that the same stuff that's been a problem for several years now, it's starting to pop up early again. And I will stress it is early in the season. Arniel's vision for the team is probably not going to be fully expressed for some time. But given that he coached on the team last year in an advisory role, mind you, an assistant coach, but briefly an interim coach as well, I just wonder how different his stuff is going to be. his time on ice deployments have generally been pretty even, which is a change from Bones. But beyond that, I sort of want to see, again, I've made this point before, but I need to see more from him to really start to get a feel for what his vision for the team is. And it's not like this stuff really isn't fixable. I think it's actually relatively easy to make the change. It's just a question of whether Arneal recognizes it, whether he feels he can make that change, or whether there are external factors like maybe Scheifele or Chipman or somebody else calling the shots. Maybe they feel that it's just not really appropriate to step in and split up Connor and Scheifele. So lots of interesting food for thought in the first few games. The nice thing is that you're still 3-0, so the Jets are one of the only undefeated teams in the league. There's just a handful of them out there. I'm not including Tampa because they've only played one game, but of the teams that have played at least 3 games, the Jets are one of 4 so far that are still undefeated. So, impressive start, really fun. And I just hope that they can find a way to get the 5v5 offense going, because once they do, I think this team's going to be a problem. The Jets are like just a couple of small tweaks away from being a regular season, well, I don't know. What do you want to call it? A bomb, a beast, a monster? The Jets are doing a lot of the other stuff around, the top 6 being a problem really, really well. And if they solve that skill line issue, I promise you the dividends will start to be reaped. And it could especially help the Jets with seeding, and if they want to maybe take a pass at some trade deadline stuff, kind of figuring out how to bring in somebody that's going to really optimize the lineup. So, I think I might be saying that it is concerning right now, but I also am saying that I think the switch is going to really be beneficial to the team, and it could make this team a really legit threat, because you look at the rest of the league this year, and so far there's not really many teams that you should be afraid of. In fact, I think the Jets could go toe-to-toe reasonably with almost anyone and actually potentially prevail. The Avs are much weaker than they were in previous years. Dallas is good, but still a little bit dicey on the back end. Vegas is solid, but, well, you understand the Knights thing. You know how to get through them. It's still a difficult task, but you can beat them. Who else is great? I mean, there's just not a lot of teams where I'm particularly freaked out, right? So still early in the season, but some food for thought going forward. Now, I do want to talk about how long the Jets can go through all of this without maybe making the swap. And, I think the Jets could actually survive a decent bit, but just how long? We'll chat about that in just a moment. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at DoorDash, at FanDuel. NFL fans, it is time to start the season with a big return, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Obviously, for those of you who have heard us talk about FanDuel before, you know that it's a very safe, secure, and easy-to-use platform that really makes betting as fun and as accessible for everyone as possible. And for all of you NFL fans, you know that the first 6 weeks of action have been pretty darn chaotic. For me, I don't really know if there are that many front runners, for a Super Bowl favorite, but if you're getting a hunch maybe in the middle of one of these games, you can verify that hunch by checking out the latest stats, via live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing those bets. Again, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. This is a great time to get in on the action. Obviously, if you are thinking that maybe a team like the Ravens could go all the way with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, might be worth putting a few bucks down. Or if you believe in the Vikings, maybe you think that this is their year that the defense runs the NFC. Drop that $5 bet and it could take you to payday. But you can only do it at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about the Jets. And, for Winnipeg, I think it's been an interesting, past couple of games. But I think the biggest question that I have for the team is how sustainable is the way that they're playing right now? And I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to last particularly long. Hellebuck, I think, can go for a fair distance. But if you're thinking about the Jets not really being 5v5 juggernauts, that's where I start to have some questions. 5v5 play for the Jets has typically been a little bit of a problem over the years. Whether Winnipeg is one of those teams that's just lacking high end elite scoring talent, or has maybe a few too many veterans that are perhaps on the slower side. The Jets just don't traditionally outplay their opponents by a significant margin when it comes to even strength play. Now, there was an exception, and that was 2017, 2018, and arguably 14, 15. A couple of other years where the Jets were probably a little bit above average or reasonably above break even. But for the most part, it's really come down to Hellebuck leading the way. And last year it was Hellebuck, and for about half the season it was also the defense. That kind of declined a little bit in the second half. But for the most part, Helly has been an absolute beast for this team. Last year, career best season. And this year, he's already had, a shutout, and he's already one of the top performers in goals against average, which I don't really love that stat, but people still use it, and save percentage. So, this could be a long year for Hellebuck. I think the Jets kind of need to figure out how to start scoring goals and give him support, because if you're asking him to concede less than one goal or less than two goals every single game, you're going to have issues. Now, the Jets are certainly going to score more than one goal, but I will say for the first couple of games, it is not comforting that the Jets struggled to get past Minnesota on the consecutive end of games, but or also the rebuilding Blackhawks. So I just have some questions, right? I think the Jets can maybe get away with this for a few weeks, maybe even a month or two. But as time starts wearing on, I just wonder if teams are going to start putting a few more past Helly. His workload's going to have to increase. He's going to have to try and really be at his absolute best. And I just don't think that really is a sustainable model for success. The Jets really want to start setting good habits early to carry them through the year, because there are going to be parts of the season where they don't play well. It's just going to happen. They're going to have injuries. They're going to have some swells. They're going to have some areas where the Jets just maybe start to lose some detail and start losing focus. And it happens to every team. And so, taking advantage of this early period where the Jets can experiment, they can start to make changes and make adjustments to their 5v5 play before it gets too late in the season, I think is a really opportune time to make the most of it and start putting this team on a path towards playoff success. Really, the playoff stuff is where the Jets struggle the most. And if they can start to deal with that ahead of time, I would feel a lot better about the season. Arniel may not make changes for a little bit, but I do think if things keep stagnating a bit, especially with the Ehlers line, that could be where he starts to make some adjustments. We've already seen him do some line blender stuff early, not necessarily the way that I would have preferred, but, a change is a change. It is what it is. Sometimes you just have to take what you can get. So, for me, I think, Winnipeg definitely is benefiting from the fact that it's just 3 games into the season. There is still plenty of time to fix some of the stuff. And I think, the Jets probably will start to sort this stuff out over the next few weeks. But I do think that if you don't make changes, it's going to be a really tough year for Helly. And I don't know if that contributes to what happens to him in the playoffs. But for Winnipeg, they basically have to have everyone playing at max level, or else the postseason's going to be another short trip. So, curious to know what you think of the team so far. Have you been impressed with the Jets? Do you like the way that Arniel is having them play? What do you think stands out to you as the most concerning thing? Drop your comments or feedback below, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, I think I might talk a little bit about some of the prospects and some of their early season returns. Some very interesting stuff on Kevin He, Kieran Walton, and a few others, players who I think, for me, have some real NHL potential, and maybe even more potential than what they were originally thought to have when they were drafted. So, exciting times for the Jets' future is all I can say. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more Jets season coverage, so don't go anywhere. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.